Good afternoon, and I'd like to welcome everybody to BTI's webinar this afternoon on delivering world-class client feedback and using it to your advantage. I am Michael Reinowesser. I am president of the BTI Consulting Group, and I'm being joined today by Jennifer Patron-Dizo, who is on the line with me, and we will be talking about world-class client feedback. You'll find during the webinar, the next hour or so, we're going to be co-presenting. Jennifer, of course, will be fielding the difficult questions and talking about the difficult aspects of the data, and I will try to play a more relaxed role. As we start this afternoon, we have over 300 people joining us, so we're very excited at the tremendous turnout and the enthusiasm for trying to get a hold of world-class feedback and using it in our firms. And we'll get started by talking about really one of the fundamental principles behind client feedback and thinking. And that is the whole idea of client satisfaction we have found is the enemy of superior client service. That it actually prevents superior client service and works to slow down the performance of a law firm. How can that possibly be? Well, as we think about it, it starts really at the very beginning where we look at the derivative and the etymology of the word satisfaction, which means to do enough, from the Latin satisfacere. And to do enough in today's environment, or almost any environment, really is not enough to gain an advantage in your client base or in the market. Anytime you have a competitive marketplace, you have more than one competitor, it is the provider, the law firm that delivers the superior client service that will be able to get the advantage. And if you're just doing enough, you're just getting by. And it gets you by, it keeps you in the game, but unfortunately, it only keeps you in the game until you avoid getting replaced, or someone comes along and delivers a superior performance, and then all of a sudden this whole idea of client satisfaction becomes lost, and what clients think about is performance. Client satisfaction itself is actually a state of mind, it's an emotion. So it's important to measure, but in terms of using it as your driving force, this will become secondary to the ongoing day-to-day activities in which you interact with your clients on a continuing basis. It's the ongoing performance that leaves the imprint on your client, and it's the ongoing performance on which and around which your clients make this judgment. In addition,
well, and Michael, I think you're making a very good point, because particularly from a data and measurement standpoint, what you're saying is satisfaction is an emotion. And I think what we have found is when we measure an emotion, it is not necessarily indicative of how a client is actually going to behave. And behavior is what we as law firms are, of course, most interested in. How are our clients spending? Who are they relying on? Why are they relying on those firms? And the very best feedback initiatives drill down to this aspect of understanding behavior as opposed to emotion. Because I think, everyone can probably think of a time when we've gone out and assessed satisfaction and we find that, yes, our clients are satisfied, but when we look at the financials, perhaps we haven't been winning as much work lately as we used to be. Or, they've hired a new law firm for a new matter and we weren't even a part of the RFP process. And so when we measure emotion, we don't understand the why. And so the very best initiatives really drill down to this why, understanding the behavior. And there's a number of ways that we can get at that behavior. And I want to show you a few examples, because I think, examples, of course, better illustrate what we're talking about as opposed to simply talking about the methodology. So one way to measure behavior is to understand our position with law firms. Clients rely on a number of different law firms, and where we are in that roster is critically important to understanding our relationship. If we're a primary law firm, our clients are going to turn to us first when new matters arise, and they also will spend the most money with us. In fact, a single primary provider can capture somewhere between 35 to 50% of a client's total spending with law firms. So it's critically important to understand if we're in that position, and if not, how do we get to that position? If we're a secondary provider, we still have very good access to the client, but there's more opportunity. So understanding that gives us the first sort of step in assessing the strength of our relationships. Now, our current standing, of course, is only one side of the story. We also want to know, is there a potential to grow with clients? And to assess that strength of the relationships, we can take where we're positioned with clients and also whether or not clients are recommending us. Recommendations are an indicator of growth for a firm. And when we're in a position where clients are turning to us first and recommending us first, now we have the strongest possible client relationship. These are clients that we're well positioned to grow with, and we need to be targeting opportunities within these clients. And of course, as you know, equally, if not more important, is understanding the client relationships where we don't have that strength, because those relationships are vulnerable to competitors. And so we want to make sure that we can go in and target those relationships and improve them, bring them over to the strength side, get client loyalty from them. Because I know at the end of the day, you know, we don't work in a vacuum. We are competing against a number of other law firms, and BTI's research, in fact, has shown that a typical large organization, on average, will work with 47 different law firms on a daily basis. And if we set up a feedback initiative that doesn't take into account this competitive environment, we're not getting a realistic picture of how we're performing. So we want to do a side-by-side comparison of our performance to a competitor, because it's all nice to know if we, you know, our clients are satisfied and they think we're doing great, but if another firm serving them is doing exceptional, well, that's a critical piece of information that we want to know. So we can do a side-by-side analysis on what % of clients think we're performing better than a competitor. What % of clients maybe see us performing about the same as somebody else they rely on. This is an undifferentiated standpoint, and I think, as everyone on the call probably realizes, differentiation is key to winning new business. It's basically when clients ask themselves, why should I hire you over another law firm? And then again, on the measuring side-by-side component, it's the piece of the pie, of course, that nobody wants to talk about and is scared to see, but what % of clients is there a law firm who's performing better than me? And these are actionable components that now we know we can go and target an improvement plan. When we simply assess satisfaction, if a client says they're satisfied, well, there's no next step. But when we focus on a behavior, now we can plot a way to move forward. And the best feedback initiatives aren't only focused on the relationship. I think it's important to understand that when a client engages in feedback with us, we have an opportunity to get a lot of information from them. So we want to make the best use of that time. We can determine, for instance, where a client may be using outside counsel and not turning to us. So for example, I know these slides are a little small, they're really just representations of the data that we can learn, but for example, in this instance, there was a law firm where 50% of their clients were using outside counsel for IP. However, only 20% of the clients were turning to this law firm. So there's a huge opportunity gap, and when we understand that, now we can strategically target our resources towards that particular area. We can also look at things like client wallet share. We know our clients spend a certain amount of money with their outside law firms. What percentage of this are we receiving? Are we in that 30 to 50% range where the primary law firms are? If not, we have an opportunity to boost business in this client base. We also can uncover things like hiring triggers. understanding what % of our client base is actively hiring and what % are considering us for new work. So again, on the specific instance that we have up there, we have 75% of clients were considering a new law firm for a new matter. However, in this research initiative, only 25% were considering the law firm that we were doing this research for. So think about the power of that. Start learning this. Go ahead, Michael.
I was just going to say it brings up another key point that not only do we have to look at client feedback on an individual client basis, but looking across the firm, because in this particular instance, the impact of looking across the firm and finding out that only 27% of our clients considered us when they had a need, meaning, of course, that 3/4 of the clients did not, just had such an enormous impact on how the partners in the firm and how the business development department, the marketing people, and even the managing partner just completely reframed the approach to business development. And that really had a profound impact, not just on the individual partners, but on the entire firm, to ensure that that number gets reversed, that they're considered 75% of the time and not considered 25%. So in looking at these, different aspects, the common message here really is to go beyond satisfaction. Look at all the different constellation of factors and performance drivers impacting the relationship and being able to put those together so that we can improve our performance. When we look at how world-class organizations, those organizations that really not only embrace the feedback, but have the feedback that will really drive performance, not just test satisfaction, because as we discussed, satisfaction will only get you so far and is only a point in time. It's the performance. These organizations look at the feedback completely differently. What we've tried to do in this slide in front of you is really try to capture most of the more impactful activities and behaviors your firm engages in or clients think about to drive that performance forward.
Now, Michael, I actually want to interrupt you quickly because we're getting a number of people asking the same question, so I think it probably bears talking about. When you look at this, are there certain measures that are either more important, or another aspect that's being asked, are there some that are typically left out of your more run-of-the-mill feedback initiative?
Well, yes. The important ones will be, first, the number, in this case, the number of law firms used, because if you don't know where you stand, if you're number 1 but you're acting like you're number 3, or if you're number 4 and you're acting like you're number 1, there's all kinds of implications. There's all kinds of performance issues in terms of your benchmarks of how you're performing, what your strengths and weaknesses are. So that's always one of the core pieces of data that world-class organizations will embrace. And then clearly, if it's the accounting firms, it's the number of accounting firms, it's the number of management consulting firms, the number of digital marketing agencies. And we find it in every professional service industry. The second one would be, believe it or not, what drives clients crazy, almost right here in the center. And this is extraordinarily important because this could be the germ of issues down the road. And what world-class organizations have learned is they want to squash, kill, and otherwise eliminate anything that is bothering their clients. Now, that may be the impossible task, but they are unending in their quest to do that. So if you can find the little things that are starting to get the client's attention in a less than flattering or less than complimentary way, we want to get those early before they ever become issues. And often what drives clients crazy, especially if you find it across the firm as you look across your client feedback and all the interviews you're doing, what you'll find is that sometimes, fairly small but important trends can be spotted. So that would be another one. Then we've got the activities that drive client service. So you could use the BTI 17 activities, which many professional service firms use. And I would want to look at my behavior and my performance, the 17 activities allow you to put that in a granular fashion. So those 3 would be my starters, and then I would quickly follow that, Jennifer, with the competitive insight. The world-class organizations want to know and act on who is in their client base and what they're doing and how they compare on those 17 activities. Where are competitors in the ranking of the number of firms that clients use? Because you could be a strong number 2, but if number 1 is performing 15 or 20% better than you, 60% better than you on any one of the 17 activities, we know we have some very targeted work to do. So what it does is it identifies areas where you may be strong but not strong enough to become that primary, that lead provider, getting the most fees from your client and having that defensible position where you could keep others out. The other is you may find areas of weakness where you may be, strong, but other clients have 1 or 2 places where they're just a little bit better, or you might find situations where clients are doing more complex work or less complex work and maybe forcing your firm in the middle. So that competitive insight becomes, number 4. And that kind of foursome really paints a robust picture of how you're performing. If I were able to add a few more, I would probably immediately go into things like clients' goals and objectives, because clients' goals and objectives change like clockwork every 18 to 24 months. So if we're not tapped into those and anticipating those, then we're behind the 8 ball. And then I would probably want to, test client expectations, because client expectations are going to follow goals and objectives. And if we have our fingers on the pulse of those 6 or 7 activities, then we know we're, getting the most robust feedback that, again, will drive that world-class performance and have that ongoing imprint on a continuing basis to deliver superior client service better than anything our client receives from anybody else, putting us in that really extraordinary and competitively advantaged position.
Well, and I think that's a great way to sort of tie this back to where we started, because this really is about getting to the superior level. That's superior is what's going to differentiate us. It's what's going to win us the new work. It's where we're going to have the absolute best client relationships. And so if we understand each of these components about our clients, we're far better positioned to meet that level of superior, because we're not looking for anything less than that. And in fact, superior performance is tied to some very real financial benchmarks. And in fact, so you can see here, for example, if I'm a firm that delivers superior service, I can expect roughly 35% higher growth than a firm that is not delivering superior service. So that's a very powerful statement. So superior service is tied to profitability, rate premiums, retention, growth. So is superior service important? Well, only if you think these things are important, and I have a feeling that most people on today's call probably find these things important.
And the other thing just to point out, Jennifer, and I'd remind everyone, is that these performance metrics, these results, apply in a down market. In a flat market where the legal market is and where it's not growing and we have to take share from every other firm that is trying to compete in our client base, these are the numbers that still apply. So not only will they keep you in a competitive position, you can see superior client service drives superior results even in a flat marketplace.
Well, exactly, and more so because clients are seeking this out. This is the differentiation. And I want to sort of make the note, because we touched upon it briefly, and we're going to get into a lot more detail about this, but this is a quantitative measure of service. So we're not going out to clients and saying, are you happy with how we're doing? There are very distinct activities that we can do with our clients that drive this level of superior service. And so it's important to understand how we get there, because this is how we form those strong relationships that I talked a little bit about before. And in fact, for anyone who has heard BTI talk before, you've probably heard us talk about this idea of clientopia. And clientopia is what we consider the ideal relationship. This is when you are in that leading primary position for your clients, and also you're the first firm that a client will recommend in an unprompted manner. And this place is where you're going to have those strongest relationships.
Good. Jennifer, we just got a question. Somebody asked how this relates to Net Promoter.
Yes. So I know Net Promoter is a trademarked methodology, and we actually approach this a little differently, in fact, quite differently than they do. So when you go out with their methodology, how they talk to clients is they will ask clients, how likely are you to recommend law firm X? And as soon as you put a law firm name into that question, this becomes a prompted question. You've directed your client's thinking towards a specific firm. And what we have found is that somewhere between 60 to 80% of clients are going to say that they're likely or very likely to recommend you. Now, what BTI has found, when we go out and ask clients an unprompted question, we ask them, who do you recommend to your peers? We don't assign a law firm name to it. And when we ask this question, a full 45% of clients who had just said they were likely or very likely to recommend you do not, in fact, include you in that list of law firms that they name. So in an unprompted manner, you're not getting the recommendation. And these unprompted recommendations are what drive growth for law firms. A full 57% of legal decision makers have told us that they will outright hire a law firm based on a single unprompted recommendation from a peer. So it's a very distinct difference how you ask this question. And when you ask it open-ended, you get a much more realistic view of that relationship. And in fact, BTI has gone out and we assess clientopia rates for the legal market as a whole. So each year we talk to somewhere between 300 and 500 general counsel and legal decision makers. And what we have found, this is our newest piece of research, in fact, that 40% of clients are recommending their leading primary firm first in an unprompted way. Now, when I look at this as a law firm, I actually consider this good news for the market. Because what this is telling me is that about 60% of legal decision makers are saying, well, I use my primary law firm, but I'm not recommending them. The relationship isn't ideal. And if another law firm was to come along and impress me enough, I'd probably give them a chance. And I want to stress that this goes back to that superior service. The only way to differentiate and to stand out with clients is to deliver on that superior level. And the other thing to point out is we've been trending this for the past 15 years. And this year, this is getting close to a high watermark. So last year, clientopia rates were somewhere between 32 and 34%. This year, they're up to 40%. Clients are becoming more loyal to their law firms. And what that tells me is that law firms are really beginning to up their client service game. They're becoming far more focused on using client service as a differentiator, and now is the time to capitalize on learning as much as we can from our clients. Because once we know what our clients' expectations are, when we know what drives them crazy, all those metrics that Michael was just talking about, that's how we begin to deliver that superior service. We can outpace the other competitors. So not only is it important to understand what's going on in the marketplace, but this is something that we can also build into our own feedback initiatives. Understanding our own personal clientopia rates is as important because now we can assess our own relationships. So we have actually studied this for law firm clients, and there's a number of things that we can find. And Michael, if you wouldn't mind going ahead onto the next slide. what you can see is a Clientopia rate will span a number of ranges. So there are some firms who will have Clientopia rates as high as 70%. 70% of their clients are loyal. There's also firms on the other end of the spectrum where they have 24% of this Clientopia, client loyalty. Now, because we know the market average is 40%, most law firms are going to fall somewhere in the middle. But it's important to measure this within our own client base because it's wildly informing. So for example, if I'm law firm B, I have 50% Clientopia. So 50% of my clients are loyal. That means I'm very well positioned to grow with that 50% right now. So we can target specifically by client who they are. Of course, the other side is it's very interesting to know which 50% we don't have this strong relationship with, because those are going to be the relationships that are susceptible to our competitors coming in. So now if we know which clients we are or are not in Clientopia, we can formulate some pretty focused client action plans in order to improve and also grow our relationships. Now, of course, the question is, how do you go about and bring more relationships into Clientopia?
It's interesting, Jennifer, if I can just jump in. One of the things I think is really important, because as soon as you said, how do you bring more clients into the Clientopia relationship and how do you deliver superior client service, if we can jump over to the Big Four for a minute. If you look at the Big Four, the average Clientopia rate for the Big Four accounting firms is roughly 57%. So it's almost a third higher than it is in law. And when you ask the question how, one of the things you find is that if you walk into 3 of the Big Four, that each of the Big Four requires each of their practices and each of the different partnerships around the world, so this is global, to conduct rich, robust, data-driven client feedback at least every 18 to 24 months at an absolute minimum. Some of the partnerships and regions of the world do it more. But it's just really surprising how when you drive this kind of data-driven, complex relationship approach to the client feedback, how much higher your Clientopia rate can be. So that's a real-life example, and of course they have many clients and have been kind of formulating their client plans a little bit longer than law firms, but I think law firms can learn a tremendous amount by seeing the power of incorporating this in the ongoing operations of the firm. Now, as we think about ongoing operations, I know many of our friends and clients are familiar with the BTI 17 activities proven to drive relationships. And again, the purpose of today is not so much to describe what each one of these is. We're going to be doing that in an upcoming webinar. However, we are going to focus a little bit on the activities in the upper right, which are commitment to help, value for the dollar, client focus, and understanding the client's business. And when we think about the understanding what drives superior client performance, client service performance, these are the 4 most influential activities, not just because we say so, but actually when you look at it statistically, you see some very kind of powerful statistics and correlation coefficients here. If you look at the chart that's in front of you, this will show the correlation of each factor to this Clientopia. And you see it goes, a perfect negative correlation would be -1 all the way here on the left. A perfect positive correlation is 1.0. And you can see these 4 activities.
Michael, if you want me to jump in, because I know that this is statistics, and you always want me to do the hard statistics data stuff. So when we have a perfect positive correlation, that means that there's 2 variables that are highly associated. So the closer that we get to 1, the more associated 2 components are. So take, for example, understanding the client's business. We're at nearly a 0.7, so very close to 1, which means the higher we perform in understanding the client's business, the higher our Clientopia rates are going to be. And this is true across each of the activities because we are very far away from that -1. -1 means there's absolutely no association between the activities. But all of these are highly correlated. So when we perform on these activities, we're going to drive up our client Topia rates. And as we saw, that's tied to those financial benefits that we were discussing earlier.
Right, and the reason we kind of always try to trot these out is because sometimes the broad partnerships, the attorneys in the firm, want to know that the questions that we're asking clients and the data that we're gathering actually make an impact. And just to put this in perspective, if you go to a hedge fund, if you go to private equity investors, if they find a positive correlation coefficient of roughly 0.1 or higher, so about 10%, you will see them start to become attracted to an investment. So the fact that these are, 4 to 5 to 6 times that level show the power of using these 4 activities to drive our superior client service performance with clients. So again, this kind of sits well with the attorneys in knowing that we are asking meaningful, impactful questions to get world-class client feedback to drive that kind of performance. Now, what does this actually look like? Well, the world-class organization, as we talked about, will look at this in a couple of different ways. The first is they'll get a score from their clients on each of these activities, and you can see that it is, quite granular. It actually boils down to a number here on commitment to help. And our client was the dot or the diamond that's in orange. We also asked about a competitor, and you can see that the competitor scores were actually kind of interesting because in client focus, they're roughly the same. They're lower in commitment to help. They're about the same in understanding the client's business, yet they're dramatically lower than the competitor in value for the dollar. So immediately we kind of try to figure out how and why that could be. And what we found is, in this particular case, what happened is this particular competitor who got such a better score in value was going out and was able to offer to a client to sit on their IP, their new product development committee, as an observer, to be able to spot intellectual property opportunities sooner, to identify regulatory issues so much earlier in the product development process that they could plan for and anticipate sometimes 2 to 3 years in advance of when they normally might get wind of this, and found themselves in a position where they could actually accelerate the new product development process and drive revenue. Now, because of the tremendous value of that, they were able to get a very high score in value, and you can see pretty substantive scores in understanding the client's business and client focus, which means that if you're law firm Z, in this case in the orange, we've got to figure out how to leapfrog that. Now, there's no way, if you're delivering superior client or trying to deliver superior performance, of learning something like that other than talking to your client. But this kind of analysis allows you to get to the granular components because it says we're certainly committed. Our understanding of the client's business is good. It could be a little bit better, but certainly it's good. But we weren't bringing that together in a way that brought value to the client. Another firm was doing that. So this, of course, our client, law firm Z, huddled and came up with some strategies to counter that, and we expect to see their value going up over time. But these are the kinds of circumstances and the granular nature of feedback that drives the world-class performance. Now, moving from performance to firms, what I'd like to do is really talk about how law firms are embracing using client feedback. And during this discussion, what I'd like to talk about also is how law firms drive the client feedback process. How do they get it started? How do they get it going? How do they create the kind of enthusiasm that drives the world-class performance? Well, in stage one, we'll call these people, these firms, the non-believers. basically, they've decided that they know everything there is to know about their clients, and they have decided not to get client feedback. They don't want to bother their clients, and they have all kinds of reasons, and there's no shortage of reasons to decide to not get client feedback, and that is all the airplay and discussion we will give to the non-believers. Stage 2, we'll call these the test pilots. These law firms are doing, client feedback, but they're doing it on a relatively smaller scale. So these are the firms, they're in the initial stages typically, and they're getting some traction, and the partners that are engaged in the process tend to be pretty happy with what they're doing. The challenge in getting the test pilot program off the ground, is to find the closet supporters. Every firm, or virtually every firm, has, somewhere between, 12 and 20% of the partners who are sitting in their offices and sitting at their desks, and they're wondering, how and why aren't we getting client feedback? We need some kind of vehicle to better understand how we're performing, and we know that I need either a leadership partner, someone from the CMO's office, or a third party to go in and find out the things that I can't learn myself. What are the blind spots? What are the things the clients won't tell me that I should be concerned about? And what we found is the test pilots are very good at kind of getting this small level of support. So you don't even try to get firm-wide support. What you're going to do is launch an initial program. And you're just going to use these partners who want to be in the program. And what happens is, usually these partners are, on a scale of 1 to 10, they're a 10 plus because they're very happy, they're getting what they want, and they're able to improve the relationship. They know intuitively sometimes how to embrace the data, the results of the client feedback. And what happens in the test pilot firms is the CMO, the management boards, the executive committees will start to celebrate this kind of insight and success. They will start talking about it to the partners of the firm at firm-wide events, at practice meetings, and they will ask these partners to share their experiences. What have they learned? What have they been able to do that they couldn't have done otherwise? Has it turned into real new additional business? What's the scale of that business? Was it just some incremental piece of work we may have gotten anyway? Or did this invite us in for a whole new set of opportunities that we weren't able to get without this kind of feedback? That's the kind of conversation that gets started. And what happens is slowly, sometimes a little faster than others, the partners or some of them will become curious, and the CMOs and the firm embrace this curiosity. And as they're embracing the curiosity, they're highlighting the changes in success that came about from the feedback, and then you phase in new partners as you gain interest. So you may only phase in 1, 2, 3 at a time, but it's that ongoing traction. It's you've changed the inertia, you've changed the energy in the firm. Typically, the results get presented to the aggregate to the executive committee, or in some kind of either formal or informal analysis to start to give a sense of thinking and client feedback and add the client's eyes and ears to the executive committee thinking. This kind of stage 2 is often a precursor to what we will call stage 3. These are the strategists. So the strategists have really gone beyond the test phase, and they're building what we would call the business case. They're looking at potential changes in the financial metrics. They're looking for warning signs and firm-specific data on how they're doing. They've mainly started including the idea of client feedback and client feedback metrics into their business development plans. So this, you can see that one of the big differences between the strategists and the test pilots is you're starting to build it into key parts of the firm infrastructure. So what happens when you start including this in the business development plans, the partners look at it, and this is true not just of law firms, but you'll find this in the Big Four, in the management consulting arena, and other professional service firms as well. What you'll find is that once it gets included in the business development plans, the partners, the shareholders, the officers start to become more embracing and accepting of the client feedback process and more supportive of it, because they start to see, A, that it is a cultural part of the firm, a normal way to do business. B, they're starting to see the benefits in terms of what they can expect for business development, what they could expect for getting better rates. Generally speaking, they're going to use what we would call the 80-20 rule in revenue coverage. This means that what they're trying to do is find the somewhere between 20 to 40% of clients that get you to 30, 40, 50, 60% of revenue coverage. I remember not recently BTI had a client where we found that 61 clients exactly covered 70% of their fee revenue. So this budding strategist firm focused their client feedback on that very large swath of fee revenue so that what they could speak to the entire firm, and no partner could say, well, that feedback doesn't apply to me because this applied to virtually all the firm and would influence everything that would happen. They not only take the individual results and provide it back to the relationship partners, but they take the aggregate results and present it to the partnership so that everybody knows where the firm stands and, more importantly, what the recommendations are, what you can do. Each relationship manager will develop a robust follow-up plan that includes, how to improve the relationship, what opportunities are out there, what client-specific changes that we can make, and oftentimes you'll start to see it may be talked about being included in partner goals, things like that. And these strategists will also start to train the partners. They will look and perform a firm-wide analysis. So they will go through every single individual client interview, look for the analysis, look for the trends, look for the opportunities, and say, well, if we have an opportunity to in IP because we're only getting considered 25% of the time. If you take the example we gave before of only being hired or considered for hire 25% of the time, how do we increase our hireability with our clients? How do we better articulate value and make sure we don't get blindsided by other firms coming in? How do we learn to engage with our clients in different ways? How do we eliminate the things that drive our clients crazy? And we'll actually train the partners and give them tools. So they might give them sample agendas for meetings, sample questions, a schedule around which to communicate with clients on matters outside of current context and current cases so that we can see how clients are thinking about us. So you can see the strategists take a broader approach and have started building the client feedback process into the firm. So between the test pilots and the strategists, one of the big differences is as you build more into firm infrastructure, it is easier to bring partners and clients into the process. So the strategists get a little bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy by expanding the infrastructure around it. They get more feedback, so they tend to get better performance by of getting better feedback and more robust feedback across the firm. Now finally, in stage 4, you have the most advanced. And these would be what we would call the market leaders, because many of the firms in this leadership category are in fact gaining market share and are gaining share at expense of other law firms in the marketplace today. So what you find is the big difference when you graduate from being a strategist to a leader is, first, you can see that they build it right into the strategic plan. They've got the goals. They've got specific metrics. Usually they have client feedback specified right in the strategic plan. And in addition, what they're going to have is in individual partner goals. They will have the number of clients to be included in client feedback. Many are starting to now include specific client service metrics, improvements. Last time we measured it, it was X. We expect it to go up by 5%, 10%. Across the firm, they'll have strategic goals like we're going to increase our client Topia rate. We're going to increase the number of clients that see us as primary, the number of clients that recommend us, all building up to superior client service. You'll see that they have ongoing outreach every 12 to 24 months like they've already evolved to in the Big Four environment, where it's so competitive, and they'll benchmark firm-wide performance. They present the results not just to the partner, but to all staff levels. Now, granted, there may be different messages to the different staff levels because associates can't impact relationships the way that partners can, but they certainly can play a role. And they will present this in a way that everyone can grab hold and be part of the improvement process. They set, as we discussed, improvement goals, not just for the individual clients, but for the firm as a whole. They provide not only training, but coaching and support. They will be actively sharing. One of the things that's interesting about doing kind of a broader client feedback initiative is you can identify the best practices right in your own firm. So sometimes, especially, and we find this, what's interesting is not just in large firms, but even in the mid-sized firms, we will find that we can uncover certain strategies and tactics and approaches that individual partners are using that have not become institutionalized yet, that are very powerful. So one partner may be engaging with a client in a certain way that's very powerful, and we will uncover that through the client feedback, and then the firm adopts that and can share it on a firm-wide basis. In addition, what's interesting is the leaders start to use the client feedback as a vehicle to go conduct more leadership interviews and visits. And this is one of the key aspects that really drives superior performance, because the best performing organizations in the world take independent feedback, they share it with the leadership, and then the leadership, the firm itself, conducts interviews. And the importance of having the independent interview is that you will often get a look at the firm that is a little bit more unbiased and has a little more candor to it, so the leadership partners can walk in kind of better armed, knowing what to expect and knowing how to position the answers and having things thought through, and also knowing if the client is sharing everything that's on their mind. And if the client doesn't share it, usually a skilled leadership partner will be able to bring up those issues in a very diplomatic way. And then finally, what we're seeing is law firms are starting to embrace not just client service standards, which we think are a great idea, but client service standards tied to client feedback. So all the things that we hear that are important from clients, we set up as our standards to build them and link them right to their expectations. And sometimes we even share these standards with clients, which separates you from most of the law firms out there, proving to your client how you're thinking about client service, which again raises expectations, but also has already raised your performance. Now, if you're going to look and ask, roughly you'll find 11% or so of law firms are in this leadership phase. You're going to find roughly 21% of law firms are in the strategist phase. About 25% are in the test pilot phase. And that leaves, a little over half of law firms, right near 50%, as the non-believers. So we've got law firms out there conducting various forms of client feedback, and we think that part of the competitive race will be how quickly can law firms get to stage 4 and get that kind of leadership position. Now, one of the questions I see coming in by email is, how is this different or impacted by being a mid-sized or a smaller law firm? And what's interesting is there isn't a lot of difference in terms of the stages. We can show you small and medium-sized firms where they're in the leadership category, and we can show you very large firms which still don't conduct client feedback and don't believe it's part of their ongoing culture. We also find that when you think about mid-sized firms, oftentimes the granular nature of the client service is more important, because what we've found and we've talked about before is it's the non-legal aspects of the relationship that usually kind of will be the Achilles heel of any law firm. So what happens is the larger clients tend to include some legal skills evaluation, where in the middle of the market, clients tend to look just at the client service attributes. So in fact, this becomes a little more important to the small and mid-sized firms who have just as robust programs as, again, you'll find in the leadership program. You'll find some of the largest firms in the world, and you'll find some mid-sized firms as well with middle market clients performing at a superior level to their competitors as well. Now, how do we do this? What is the best way to do this? There's 4 major approaches. First is in person, telephone, online, or mail. In person, clearly the pros, you get a lot of in-depth insights, both quantitative and qualitative. You can probe and adjust. It's got a high personal touch. The challenges are it's difficult to reach scale, meaning that the time required to schedule them, execute them, is so large that it's hard to conduct a large number of them in any given point in time, like a year, 12 months. It requires skilled and strong interviewing technique, and if you're not using a third party, statistics show that the responses might be skewed a little bit positive because clients want to give good news wherever they can, and it's difficult to obtain that firm-wide insight because we can't get enough interviews done in a year or a period of time shorter than that to be able to deliver that kind of 60% revenue coverage, which can impact a firm. It's usually best for complex relationships, relationship development, and any at-risk triage. Anytime you have an at-risk relationship, we would always default to in-person. It requires that touch, and of course, not surprisingly, it's the most expensive way to go. Telephone interviews, which probably account for the most popular vehicle to conduct the interviews. One, the reason being is it's the most objective response, okay, bar none. You get more objectivity and candor over the phone than you will in person. And that's because you removed the body language and the meta-talk aspect. It's a much direct, more intimate conversation over the phone, which is a bit counterintuitive. You'll get the in-depth insights, both quantitative and qualitative, the ability to probe and adjust. It's considered high personal touch. You can get much broader reach than you can with in-person, and firm-wide and client-specific insights are much easier to reach through telephone than they are in person. The only real drawback is that it requires a fairly skilled interviewer to conduct an interview like this over the telephone, and they're very strong for assessing performance, identifying opportunities. They are much more cost-effective. They can often cost only 25 to 30%, or maybe even less sometimes, of an in-person interview, and can be conducted quickly. One of the great interesting phenomena is there's 2 fascinating phenomena about telephone interviews. One is that you do get more candor. You will just get more candor and objectivity, and those are the kinds of things we need. The other is that if you call a client and you ask to conduct an in-person interview, well, they will think in terms of how many weeks out. But if you call that same client and say you want the same amount of time by telephone, they will possibly consider the next day or the same day, so you'll get a much faster time frame, and it seems more immediate and urgent to clients. So there's a lot of benefit. Here at BTI, about 65 to 70% of all the interviews we do are by telephone. The rest would be split between in-person, followed by online, which brings us to online. Online can bring you broad reach and has really grown in the last 3 years in terms of acceptance and credibility with your clients and the community at large. It lends itself a little bit more to a quantitative than a qualitative analysis, but you can still get a touch of qualitative in there if you design it well. And you have the ability to adjust and change a question or two after you start getting a response. You can look at some of your responses and be able to change a question if you find that there's some misinterpretation there. The cons are something we call response bias in the trade, which means that you tend to get more responses from those that love you and those that really hate you. and we lose a little bit in the middle, so we lose some of the core performers right there in the crux of the client base. They lack personal connection. You're limited in response length, so sometimes clients feel constrained because, again, clients view these relationships as complex, and they sometimes want to share more than we let them in an online survey. It often lacks qualitative insights, and there's no ability to probe. They're very good, actually, for end-of-matter assessments where you're looking for a quick assessment of how you did, some quick feedback on a matter. If you are trying to get the viewpoint of the entire client base, for example, for a firm that's designing their website or trying to get a sense of strategic opportunities, online might make a whole lot of sense. And then finally, people do still conduct mail surveys. They have broad reach. They lend themselves to quantitative analysis. They have the lowest response rate of any vehicle that we're aware of. You have that response bias we talked about. They lack personal connection. They have limited length, lack qualitative insights. You can't probe. And in all good faith, I'm not sure where I would recommend anybody on this call use a mail survey. They're just become less and less effective unless you have a really novel approach and a very, very complex and unique approach to delivering it to make it stand out. It will not provide the kind of insight to be able to deliver world-class client service.
Now, Michael, I know we're getting short on time here. A couple of people have asked, though, they say that they're already doing some form of research, so in-person interviews either by the managing partner or the relationship partner. How does that fit into what we've been talking about, which is this robust feedback program?
Well, I think they usually are quite complementary. As we talked about before, the complex, more independent research can feed the internal interviews being conducted by leadership partners. So that's one way. A second way is we do have leadership partners that we know of both in law and other professions who conduct these kinds of very in-depth data-driven approach to get the granularity. So kind of a change in approach is often effective as well. But we would encourage anyone who's doing internal or their own programs to try to incorporate some of the more performance-based aspects of the feedback to be able to help improve performance. In fact, the slide that I've just put up would suggest at least 7 questions that we would recommend that you add, noting that in number 2 we ask which law firms you consider to be primary. The order matters because statistics show they will give you their most important primary first. Asking about innovation will tell you about things that, like that competitor we mentioned that was meeting with the IP, meeting with the new product development committee. You will learn all about what other firms are doing in your client base. Number 4, who do you recommend to your peers and in what order? Because if you're not first, then we want to talk about what that means. The 4 activities we talked about, rating another firm and what drives you crazy. Those are just 7, and there's others, but these 7 will give you a very robust look that any leadership partner can incorporate into their process. In terms of using the feedback, largest clients are a market of one now. They're not just clients that are out there at in-depth research at a single client organization. I know we were asked to go into a very large relationship. We conducted 38 interviews at one client. Clearly this is a big relationship, but as big as it was, those 38 interviews completely changed the relationship to the point where the client asked if they could provide the non-proprietary aspects of the results to their other law firms to help them improve. So it really put them in a very strong position. Another example is a client used a series of continuing client interviews, very tactically focused to support business development, and over a 4-year period improved or changed fees from $680,000 to $14 million over a 4 to 4.5 year period, all based on tactics and strategies driven by client feedback. The firm-wide consistency, being able to bring together those client service standards based on what clients want has really changed how some law firms and professional service firms have changed their behavior around clients at all levels. Partners included, partners maybe the most, and it gives you the ability to train and create a sense of uniformity across the firm at a very high level about client service. Sometimes client feedback will tell you that there needs to be an intervention. We get too low scores as another firm that's doing a tremendously large amount of work. This enables you to put together a SWAT team to repair and grow relationships, and unfortunately that's out there. We did a study of all the research that we have done, and we found that roughly between 3 and 4 of every 40 clients that we interview is at risk in some way and requires an intervention. And the good news is most of our clients can save that, but if you don't go in with the client-specific plan, you're not going to save that. And if you don't know it's there, you're not going to save that. And then finally, benchmarking, this continuing process, is one of the things that creates market leaders because, again, client goals change every 12 to 24 months. So the metrics and the activities behind that will change every 24 months to continue to try to track. And ideally, we want to leapfrog and anticipate client needs. And some organizations get there in the second or third round because they get so familiar with the client feedback. But these are some of the many, many ways that you can incorporate it to get just tremendous payback on your client feedback initiatives and boosting client service across the firm. In terms of how BTI does this, as many of you know, we are in the business of providing client feedback. So, we'll work with our clients to define what they want, what they're trying to get at it, and we really ask our clients to tell us what they want out of it, and we'll design the custom survey instrument for it. We provide all our clients with introductory letters to introduce the process to clients, to partners, and a set of FAQs, frequently asked questions, for the partners to try to anticipate things that they're going to ask. We provide a timeline as to when the deliverables will show up, what the milestones are, and what that means, and help you manage this in your firms. You'll get a weekly project update. You'll start getting the client interview transcripts in about 5 to 7 working days, preliminary insights across the firm by roughly week 3, and immediate notification of any opportunities or at-risk relationships, and we send a thank you note every day, the day of an interview. We'll help you follow up with your firm-wide benchmarking, which we provide to our clients as part of our services and doing the interviews. Client-specific insights. We develop detailed recommendations for each client with you, implementation plans, and we present the results to various levels of the firm depending on the firm's specific needs and objectives, and provide ongoing coaching. So it's kind of an ongoing process that we make as user-friendly, and we tailor many of these different approaches, the different steps, to meet specific client demands that you may have. And then finally, we would welcome any other thoughts and questions by email or by chat. We'll be making a recording of today's webinar available on our website, and then you can expect that we'll send you a copy of the slides that you'll have no later than tomorrow morning. If you have any questions or would like to talk about your own programs or how to improve your programs, you can reach me, Michael Reinowesser, at the number at the top, Jennifer at the number below. And I would encourage you all to follow us at The Mad Clientist and read our blog, The Mad Clientist, and follow us on social media. And look forward to hearing from everybody and appreciate it. We've got virtually almost all the people that started with us are still on, so we appreciate your patience over the lunch hour, and we look forward to hearing from you as we move forward with our client feedback programs, and wish you a good day.